The task of producing sperm and eggs and bringing them together for the creation of a new human life is the function of the reproductive system.
A child is born as the result of a collaboration between two human reproductive systems. The systems which create that child are different in the male and female. Different organs have different functions that support each sex's contribution to the reproductive process.
The baby is the result of the union of two sex cells, one an egg produced by a female, the other a sperm produced by a male. During the previous 9 months, from conception to birth, two reproductive systems have produced those cells and brought them together for fertilization, and one has provided support for the development of the fertilized egg.
At the time of its birth, the baby has all the essential organs of its own reproductive system, male or female, and its bloodstream already contains the hormones that control early sexual development. As time passes, small amounts of these hormones will continue to regulate the maturation of its reproductive system.
That maturation accelerates when an individual enters the stage of life called puberty. For a girl, this usually happens when she is between 11 and 14 years old. Major changes begin happening to her body. These prepare her reproductive system for its most important function, to release a series of eggs and provide a nourishing environment in which that egg can grow if it is fertilized by a sperm. A woman's primary sex organs are two ovaries, each about the size and shape of a walnut, but longer and flatter. Here the egg cells originate. Each ovary may contain millions of potential eggs, but the eggs lie dormant until puberty. At this time, cells in the hypothalamus of a woman's brain produce a hormone, which is carried by the bloodstream to her pituitary gland. In response, the pituitary gland increases its secretion of two hormones called FSH and LH. FSH stimulates the ovaries to put out hormones of their own. Estrogens, and to a much lesser extent progesterones, cause the physical changes of puberty. Under this influence, a girl's adult female sexual characteristics gradually emerge. Her breasts grow, she grows pubic hair and hair in her armpits. Then, as she becomes a woman, her first menstrual cycle begins. Now her body is ready to take part in producing a baby. Under the influence of FSH and LH from the pituitary, one of the immature egg cells already present in her ovaries begins to grow within a sac of cells called the follicle. The follicle produces an increasing amount of estrogen, which begins to prepare the uterus to receive the egg, which at this stage is called an oocyte. As the oocyte and follicle grow, they move toward the outer surface of the ovary. Now the pituitary produces a surge of LH, which triggers the release of the oocyte from the follicle. The entire process, called ovulation, will occur in cycles once each month. The oocyte passes into one of two fallopian or uterine tubes. Each leads to the uterus or womb. Under the influence of LH, the follicle changes into a yellow body called the corpus luteum, which secretes increasing amounts of the hormone progesterone into the bloodstream. That progesterone completes the job of preparing the uterine lining, and its increase causes the pituitary to send out less FSH. Now the egg cell begins moving down the fallopian tube. Each tube is about 10 centimeters long, about 4 inches. It is lined with two kinds of cells. One kind secretes mucus. The other kind is ciliated. Its cells are lined with waving hair-like cilia. They create currents in the mucus which wash the egg cell toward the uterus. The trip will take 3 days, but the egg must be fertilized, usually within 6 to 12 hours of ovulation, or it will die. Meanwhile, the hormones from the ovary have prepared the uterine wall for the possibility of receiving a fertilized egg. Layers of cells have been growing in the lining of the wall, the endometrium, served by millions of tiny new blood vessels. The endometrium has also been swelling with nutrient fluids, which could support an embryo if fertilization were to occur. This condition continues for about 10 days after ovulation. During this time, the levels of FSH and LH decrease. If the egg is not fertilized, the corpus luteum disintegrates. Then concentrations of progesterone and estrogen suddenly drop, triggering menstruation. Blood vessels in the lining constrict, reducing the flow of blood. The cells that thicken the lining begin to die and separate. This breaks the tiny new blood vessels, releasing a small amount of blood. Then, the menstrual flow begins, as dead cells and blood are carried out of the uterus into the tube-shaped vagina and eliminated from the body. This period lasts for 3 to 7 days. The fall in the concentration of female hormones will cause the hypothalamus to activate the pituitary again, triggering the development and release of another oocyte from another follicle. Thus, about every 28 days, the female's body is again prepared for the possibility that an egg will be fertilized by a sperm.
The main function of the male reproductive system is to supply that sperm cell. When a male reaches puberty, FSH and LH, the same pituitary hormones as in the female, trigger changes in the male body, but with different effects. In the male, LH affects the primary sex organs, the testes, which begin producing large amounts of the hormone testosterone. This hormone, in turn, triggers male physical and sexual maturation. During puberty, a boy's voice changes. His muscles may bulk up, his body hair and beard begin to grow. Soon his testes, commonly called testicles, grow slightly larger than a woman's ovaries. Just as the ovaries have the dual function of hormone production and egg production, so the testes produce both testosterone and sperm. The maturation of sperm is governed by testosterone from the testes and FSH from the pituitary. Unlike ovaries, the testes are suspended outside the main part of the body, in a sac called the scrotum. Here, the temperature is a few degrees lower than body temperature, ideal for the production of healthy sperm. If the temperature should fall too low, involuntary muscles in the scrotum can contract. They wrinkle the wall of the scrotum and raise the testes up toward the warmth of the pelvis. This mechanism helps keep the temperature in the scrotum within the narrow range required for the growth of healthy sperm. Each testis is divided into hundreds of sections or lobules. They contain several coiled tubes, the seminiferous tubules. These are lined with cells that produce millions of microscopic sperm every day. Developing cells are pushed along a tubule by the younger cells behind them. Soon they reach the epididymis, a long coiled tube, where they are stored. Here they complete their development and gain the power to move by whipping their long tails. From the epididymis, sperm move through a tube, the vas deferens, that carries them past the bladder and into the upper urethra, a tube which also carries urine from the bladder. Just before joining the urethra, sperm mix with secretions from sac-like structures called seminal vesicles. Then the prostate gland adds its own secretions to the fluid, called semen, while the bobourethral glands add mucus, providing a kind of lubrication. Semen continues down the urethra, which has its outlet at the end of the penis. From here, it leaves the male body during ejaculation, when the prostate gland contracts repeatedly, and a nearby muscle closes the connection between bladder and urethra, so that urine can't flow through at the same time. At least 300 million sperm cells are propelled out of the male's reproductive system. If they enter the female's reproductive system at the proper time, fertilization can occur. If it is around the time of ovulation, sperm can swim up the vagina and enter the uterus and fallopian tubes. Most of the sperm will live only for another 24 hours, but when the timing is perfect, one sperm can fertilize the egg that awaits it in the fallopian tube. The moment that the egg is penetrated by a sperm, the egg's outer membrane sets up a chemical and physical barrier. No other sperm can enter. The egg has been fertilized. It is now called a zygote.
The new individual that results from this union will have physical characteristics drawn from both its mother and its father. Both have contributed genetic material that will direct the development of the fertilized egg. This genetic material is carried by chromosomes in the united sperm and egg nuclei. Chromosomes are highly coiled filaments of DNA and protein. DNA molecules are the genes, molecular codes which carry information about a person's genetic traits. Sex cells, or gametes, differ from other cells. They carry only half the number of chromosomes of most human cells. Most human cells contain 46 chromosomes joined in 23 pairs. Each chromosome in a pair carries genes for the same traits as its partner. Like other human cells, an egg begins with 46 chromosomes, but it divides by the process called meiosis. The chromosome pairs separate. Each of the resulting cells, or gametes, gets only 23 chromosomes, one from each pair. Meiosis in a female results in one egg and several cells called polar bodies. The polar bodies die. The egg carries the mother's genetic contribution. This contribution is different for each egg she produces.
Something similar happens when sperm cells mature. Each starts its development with 46 chromosomes. Through the two divisions of meiosis, 4 cells are produced, each with only 23 chromosomes, as with the egg, one from each pair. This is the father's genetic contribution. As with the mother, this contribution is somewhat different from one sperm cell to the next, because the separation of the pairs of chromosomes is a random process. When sperm and egg unite, their nuclei combine, giving the fertilized egg a total of 46 chromosomes, the human norm. 23 come from the mother, and 23 from the father. The laws of heredity determine which genes on these chromosomes will dominate as the new individual grows, determining its eye color, the shape of its mouth, its blood type, all the genetic characteristics that make up a person. The individual sex is determined by one particular pair of chromosomes. An egg cell from the female carries one X chromosome. A sperm cell contributes either an X or a Y. 2 X's will produce a female, while an X and a Y produce a male. Thus, the Y chromosome determines the baby's sex.
After an egg is fertilized and has become a zygote, development begins. The zygote divides by mitosis, the usual form of cell division, in which both resulting cells have the same number of chromosomes as the parent cell. Division continues. During this early embryonic period, the embryo migrates down the fallopian tube and into the uterus. Now its growth pattern changes. It attaches itself to the enlarged endometrium. 3 membranes develop around the cluster of cells. 2, the chorion and allantois, grow extensions into the uterus, which will become the placenta and umbilical cord. The 3rd membrane, the amnion, will form a sac filled with fluid that will encase and protect the growing cells. The embryo continues to divide and grow. Cells in various regions differentiate into tissues, which will form different organs. After about 2 months, most of the features and organs of a human have developed. The embryo has become a fetus. At this time, doctors can begin to test the developing fetus's health.
At about 2 months of the pregnancy, for the first time we can test the fetus for chromosomal problems. Those problems are hereditary problems that can be very serious for the developing fetus. Many of them are related to the age of the mother. Older mothers have more of these problems. The test can be done by placing a flexible plastic tube through the birth canal and taking small pieces of the placenta. Cells can be grown from those pieces and analyzed to see if there are any chromosomal defects in the developing fetus.
As the fetus develops, its beating heart circulates blood through tiny blood vessels, but its circulatory system is not directly connected with that of its mother. Food and oxygen pass out from the mother's blood and then through the placenta and into the umbilical cord, and from there into the fetus's bloodstream. Waste leave in the opposite direction. So what comes into the mother's body can have a direct effect on the developing fetus.
Almost anything the mother eats or inhales during the pregnancy will go to the fetus. Cigarette smoke travels to the fetus through the mother's bloodstream, and basically when the mother smokes, the baby smokes, and can be very much harmed by this smoke. Cocaine taken by the mother will addict the baby, and the baby will have serious problems with its development while trying to withdraw from this addiction. Alcohol taken by the mother can cause serious permanent brain damage and physical damage, such as stunted growth and uncoordinated movements. Even over-the-counter cold remedies can cause some significant harm to the baby and should not be used unless approved by a physician. Infections during the pregnancy will often infect the baby, and especially HIV virus can infect the baby, and we would really advise that mothers infected with this virus do not become pregnant.
Gradually, over a period of months, the development of the fetus is completed. Its features grow distinct. It begins to move inside the womb. 9 months after a single sperm fertilized a tiny egg cell, a new individual made of trillions of cells is ready to be born.
Shortly after a mother gives birth, usually when she is no longer breastfeeding her infant, her pituitary will again begin the production of hormones that renew her menstrual cycle and make another fertilization possible. This cycle will continue until she has reached her late 40s or early 50s. Then she will enter the stage of life called menopause. Hormonal commands will shut down her menstrual cycle, and she will no longer be able to bear children.
In contrast, the father will produce sperm cells all his life, although their numbers will drop as he grows older. During those years, the newborn child will grow and mature until the child, too, is ready to participate in the reproductive chain of life.